Yeah, I want you to be happy. I'm from Marin, you know. But more seriously, it's about how do we measure the quality with which the Google engine works. So when you type in something, it gives you something back. Is the answer good? Are you happy? Is it a reasonable quality? So that's really what search quality refers to, is the quality is what we measure about the accuracy, the speed, and overall impression that someone has. So we have a dashboard at work that's labeled user happiness, and we see day by day what's going on. And when it dips below a certain value, I get a phone call. It says, Russell, what's going on? Then we have to figure it out. And it's not always up and to the right. Sometimes it does go down, and we have to figure out why. So that's another part of my job, is trying to understand that. But my real job, the one that makes me happy and it gets me up in the middle of the night to think about this, is to understand how people are searching. And I mean this broadly. I mean about in the information space in the library, on the information in Google, in the information space using Baidu.cn. However they get information, what do they do? Why do they do that? That's my job. And so I want you to come along with me on a Gedanken experiment to understand the scope of my problem. Or if you're interested in information, suppose you work at the reference desk, right? Someone walks up to you and says, I want to know everything about the Civil War. And a little part of your reference librarianship goes, oh gosh, not again. Right, because you have to then go through the interview and to talk with them to figure out what they want. Or how much does the Grand Canyon weigh? I don't know. We'll work on that. But this is the problem from Google's perspective. So I want you to imagine yourself as a server in the Google farm. And someone types a query like this, Jaguar. You probably know what to give them. Probably the cat, maybe the car, maybe the Macintosh operating system. One of those, right? Or if somebody does a query like this, we know pretty much what to give them, right? Information about Iraq, fine. Now those are a little bit ambiguous. There's a little bit of polysemous information there. But if somebody does a query like that, there is one answer, right? Exactly one answer. You can hand it to them and we're done. Now from Google's perspective, we're just trying to make you as efficient and as accurate and as high quality as possible. But we don't know how to read your mind yet. Not yet. So when you do something like that, it's pretty clear. It's a navigational query. Just take me to eBay. Just get me out of here. Take me to eBay. I want to buy something. But one of the most popular queries every day, it's always in the top 15, is this query. What exactly do you want? I don't know. We still don't know. After years of this being in the top 15, it's still an uncertain answer. First, what, right? And usually we can figure that out because people will then click on first robotics or first national bank or first whatever or first place winner. But the problem is they all click on all of those. So the distribution of click patterns is basically flat and like there's no information there. So don't ever do that. It's a useless query. But another common query we get, again, in the top 20 every day is this one. And you got to ask yourself, what, are they trying to break Google? You know, it's like those old Star Trek episodes, you know, computer, compute pi to the last decimal place. And it doesn't work, right? We have a thing for that. But then here's a more common query, is something like that. Now, you think I'm kidding. But no, we actually get queries like that every day. In fact, this is 20,000, the head of 20,000 different ways to misspell Britney Spears' name. Yeah, now she has an unusual spelling. It's not that unusual, right? But one of the biggest things we did ever to increase user happiness and search quality at Google was to implement the spell checker, the spell corrector. And you've used it, haven't you? Yes. Now, interesting thing, when you ask people, because a typical thing that you do when you're trying to start up a company or invent a new product or whatever, is you go ahead and ask people, what would you like Google to do? I'll write it down, right? Nobody ever said, fix my spelling. Nobody. But we saw in the logs that there was a ton of misspelling stuff. I mean, people can't spell sex, right? And so we've gone through and we implemented the spell corrector to do that. It's a classic machine learning program that takes whatever you type, whatever you clicked on, and then says, oh, that, Britney Spears doesn't have 4 T's, but that's what you meant, right? So we spell correct it that way. Great idea. Single biggest improvement ever. Nobody ever asked for it, okay? So it's interesting to think about, people are not necessarily aware of what they need. I know this is a deep psychological truth, but in the case of just information retrieval, they often cannot articulate what their real information need is, right? Or the information behavior. So let's step back for a second and think about this, right? I mean, you've probably seen process diagrams like this before. In some sense, this is just the classic information retrieval loop, right? You identify your task, you identify some sources, you acquire information, create, and you go round and round and round, right? And there's some exogenous criteria here about the quality and whatever it is your task is and all that stuff. But here's the way it looks like from my perspective, okay? There's this vague, often slightly inarticulate expression of desire for information first, okay? And they Google it. So they go off and do that. And then they click on a couple of pages, and then we try to figure out what we can do to help out. Now, truthfully, this part down here often includes tell your friends. That means social media of one form or another, or emails, or talking to your friends, or whatever. And the fundamental question is, do you continue searching or not? So when I teach people how to search, I'm teaching them multiple things. I'm trying to get them to be better, more effective, more efficient, higher quality searchers. And that crucial decision about evaluating your results and whether or not to keep going, or how to refine, or how to extend, or whatever, is critical. A lot of people don't do it. A lot of people take the first 2 or 3 results out of Google and say, I'm done, right? This is a bad idea, just telling you, right? We'll talk about it in a little bit, but there's a lot of skills that you would think people would have, but key insight, none of this is intuitive. Nothing is intuitive. So in particular, I talked about this in the last one, so bear with me if you've seen this before, but I have slightly different slides this time. How do you find a word on a page? So you go to a search page, you land on a landing web page, and you want to find the word on it. So here is a slightly different one. You're trying to find out how long somebody took to run in a running race. You're just going to type in their name, right? But only if you know Control F, Command F. If you don't know that, then it's going to take you a long time. So we did a study at work where we asked people questions like this. Where is the altar stone at Stonehenge believed to come from? In the Tintin comics, right? So these are all basically trivia questions. People do a Google search, they land on a page, and these pages all require that you search through them. So we then gathered the amount of time it took people to solve each question, and it becomes immediately obvious whether or not you know Control F. Because for any one of these, if you spend more than 5 seconds answering the question, you don't know how to use Control F, right? And we found that people were spending 5, 10, 15 minutes on these questions. Really? So we discovered that if you do this, different variations of this experiment, it doesn't matter. If you teach somebody Control F, you can save 12% of their search time. Why this matters? For example, at Google, we have a whole panel of raters, several thousand raters that we employ as temps. We showed this result to our management, and they said, do you suppose our raters know this? These are people we hire to evaluate search pages, right? Do you suppose they know this? We did a test. Turns out, no, they don't know it. Okay, so we did that little intervention. We showed them a 30-second video. And so all raters have to watch this 30-second video, how to use Control F, right? Now you know. We saved millions of dollars per year. We saved roughly 12% of the total budget per year. My salary is paid for. I'm covered, right? Because of this one observation. So, like I said, 90% of the US internet population does not know this. And 50% of US teachers do not know this. And this surprises me to no end. But it's interesting to know that people who don't know it don't realize they don't know it, so they won't think to ask for it. Meta question for you, smart people. What skills are like that you don't know? How would you ask? Trust me, there are skills like this out there that you don't know and that I don't know. How would we find out? Right? So let's pop back to this question about what's possible to search for in Google, because it's fundamental. What do you need to know to use Google or any search engine? What do you need to know to use any information resource? So let me give you a different quiz. Do you know what's on the web? What kind of things can you search for? Don't say everything. Right? It's not a good answer, right? But I want you to think about what expertise you need in order to answer these kinds of questions. So, give you an example. Can you find a picture of Britney Spears on the web? Yeah, no problem. Okay. Can you find a picture of Rula Lenska? Okay. The people who are nodding yes know who Rula Lenska is. You watch old movies, don't you? Right. She's an old-time actress. You can actually Google her and find out. But the point is, you don't recognize the name, you have no clue, right? So would you even bother to search in Google? How about this? Can you find a picture of your grandmother? Maybe, maybe not, maybe. Okay, can you find a picture of my grandmother? Now, these sound like silly questions, but think about what you go through when you're trying to evaluate them. Can you find a picture of Ted Williams hitting a home run? Okay, if you know who Ted Williams is, famous baseball player, home run hitter, all this, yeah, sure, no problem. Can you find a video of my grandmother hitting a home run? Okay? It sounds ridiculous, but you have to use a lot of real-world knowledge to make a decent guess about that. You're making a guess about whether or not it's worth your time to do the search, whether or not it's worth your time, equivalently, to go to the library and find out. Now, my grandmother, turns out, was not a baseball player. So you now know something else, right? But it's Dan. He works at Google, so maybe there's a, right? You're a little uncertain now. My deep point is you need to have a lot of knowledge about the world in order to make sense of it, in order to make sense of your Google queries. For example, suppose you wanted to find a picture of a sleeping three-toed sloth. If you're in the 6th grade, you might not know that nationalgeographic.com is definitely going to have a picture of that. So you'll horse around forever until someone says, kid, National Geographic, or Library of Congress, or Smithsonian, right? You have a huge amount of world knowledge that guides your searches, and it's so implicit and so baked into what you know that you don't even recognize you know it. So one of my favorite examples here is, I don't know if anybody's read this book, Chasing the Sun. Anybody read it? If you haven't, librarians, you got to read this book. It's great. It's by a particular guy, and if you're a librarian, you probably know how to answer this question. Most of the world, trust me, has no clue how to answer this question, right? So for me, I would do a search for this in Google Books, and then click on the button that says find this book in a library, and it hands that metadata off to WorldCat. Type in the zip code. It says, oh yeah, by the way, it's in the Sunnyvale library. It's close to me, okay? This is really handy when you're looking for things like copies, original score for a Beethoven symphony or something like that. Because my local library can't do that for me, right? But WorldCat can. So you have to know about such things. So there's a large part of this meta-knowledge that you have about the world, about resources, about plausibility, and so on. But let's talk about a second study, which in this case we've done, and it was duplicated by Pew, which is how often do people really search? Now, I know you guys, oh, I do it all the time, right? I'm sitting in a bar with someone and someone says, what's the population of Japan? You pull out your phone, don't you? Right, population of Japan, okay? So how often do normal people search? And how confident are they in their search skills? It's an important determiner here. So if we look at this, don't have to read the whole thing, but this is basically asking people in a survey, how confident are you in your search? How good do you think you are? And yes, the Lake Wobegon effect happens here. Everyone's above average, right? 92% of people say they're confident in their searching ability. However, 66% do it less than one time a day. Yeah, there are actually people who search less than one time a day. It's interesting when you look at the curves of searchers by searches per day, huge tail, huge long tail. It's a relatively small number of people who do more than, say, 5 or 6 searches a day. All of you are in this tiny, tiny little segment. You are completely unrepresentative. Interesting people, I like you, but you're unrepresentative, right? Of the tail, which is where the bulk of the mass is, bulk of the behavior. So if you think about it this way, here's some real data. This is over, I don't know, a few million people. You look at searches per week per user, you can see this sort of distribution where 7 to 8, 9 to 10, 11 plus is way out here, right? So the big majority of people are way out there in the tail. What this means is fascinating, right? You can't get good at something you don't do. And doing one thing for 5 seconds a day does not make you an expert. Yet 96% of people say they're better than average. Okay? So what do we do? How do we understand this? So one of the things we do is we do a lot of studies. Now, we do studies in my lab, we do studies out in the field and so on. I want to show you one. I'll just show you this little video clip. This is an eye tracking study. So the pink dot there will be the guy's eyes as they move around on the page. But the interesting thing is to listen to what he says. The question we pose to this gentleman, this participant, is can you find something fun to do on Saturday night in San Francisco? And listen to what he says.
So, I want to try one last one. Okay. I see what happens. I did a showcase. 1, 2. They're not giving me a chance, man. They always for kids. No wonder I would have fine. I should find a pet. That's what I mean. So it's really hard to search for these activities.
I love Laura's nervous laughter there. She's the experimenter in the room with him, and she's thinking, yeah, you can imagine. So we cut the video there because the next query is adult activities, San Francisco Saturday night. Can't do that for you. But you see the problem, and the reason this is funny, because he's in my lab at Google, right? And if he didn't know like the internet is for porn, he doesn't know, right? How is it possible he does not know this? He also doesn't know Control F, but I'm just saying. It's an interesting problem because there are big dragons in parts of the internet, parts of your search space. He has no clue because there's no way he would do that, in public in some sense. So we have this interesting problem that Google and the web and all the information services out there and everything, it's big, it's sophisticated, it's complex, it's a giant, interesting, interlocked ecosystem. And we're trying to understand what the intuitions and expectations of our users are and how they understand that space. What's possible? What can you do? So if you think about Google's product space here for a second, we have all of these products, and you probably don't even know 80% of them. There's a ton of stuff here in search and monetization and small business support and so on. I mean, this is not even a complete list. This is a partial list. Everything from Gmail, which you know about, and address book, which you know about, website publication systems, mechanisms to do SEO and AdWords and all this stuff. We have a ton of things. I show this to you because it leads me to this one, where I foolishly started to write down a list of all different kinds of content. Kinds, you think of it as cataloging kinds, or media types, or genre types, and that's an idiot's task. You will never hit the bottom. And you could spend a long time and you'll end up with this very long list that will be incomplete. Partly because new stuff is being added to the end all the time. People are inventing new things. Vines. Oh my gosh, Vines. Oh my gosh, 360 VR videos. And old stuff drifts off into obscurity and non-support. So let's think about a couple of these, right? Think about what are traditionally thought of as offline content that have been brought online. So once upon a time, children, videos were offline. I know, Betamax, VHS, right? That stuff, that was offline. You couldn't search for it, you couldn't index it, it was hopeless. Now, of course, that's different. Google Earth, maps used to be offline technology. Books used to be an offline technology. Now it's all different. So when my kids say, oh, Dad, it's different now, they're right. They're absolutely right. So if you think about, how do we build the user interface for books? And I'm not convinced we have the right interface, but it's an interface, and it works reasonably well. You can do searches within a book. You can filter on different meta content data types. We have links to other publishers and all this stuff, right? We also have a lot of DRM because publishers impose that on us. So I know you want to see every book in full view. We can't do that, right? Publishers mostly say no, 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 no. And so we do what we can. If you think about, I showed this picture before, but the idea that you have all these maps and these interaction widgets that allow you to navigate and search. So for example, I don't have an example here, but how many people know that in Google Earth you can unwind time backwards and see archival imagery? If you don't, Google it. Go to Google, you can do it now, it's fine. Go to Google Earth and search for archival imagery. And you will find this little widget, and you can go, for example, look at this area now, go back to 1940. Somewhat different, right? Check San Francisco. We have a lot of high resolution imagery for San Francisco going back to like 1948. It's very different. My house is in a bean field, as an example. It's really interesting. But we have to figure out, how do we, A, tell you that's available, because most of you didn't know it, so we have failed at our marketing message. It is a pull-down menu item in the interface, which nobody clicks on, because I've looked at the data, right? So you see the scope of our problem, right? The library is a great thing, because people have a cultural understanding of the library. They know roughly what kind of spaces of services it has and so on. When we invent new technologies like Google Earth, there's no cultural expectation. The old metaphor of maps doesn't even begin to cover it, because I can take a map on Google Earth and start to fade back and forth between this one and that one. How would you do that in reality exactly? You can't. So let me give you a few insights about Google searchers. We're coming from this space where we're trying to invent stuff, and we invent and innovate and create based on our intuitions, based on what we understand, based on what we can study. So here's my first observation. Intuitions suck, right? I mean, I know intuitions are a lovely thing, right? They're just wrong a lot of the time. In particular, when you're looking at people who are trying to use a new technology you're developing, your intuitions are almost certainly wrong. In particular, your intuitions are wrong. We've already shown that you're in the 0.1% of all searchers. You do not have an experience that's like most people. You are too highly trained. You have the curse of knowledge. So that's why we do studies. Now, not to be too obvious about this, but we try to study people who are not like us. So the very first fallacy you always hear people do when they're inventing new technology or inventing new information service, that's the way I do it. So, right? The most of the world is not a maps librarian, right? Or the second big fallacy, my mom would do it that way. Your mom is also not representative, right? So the deep truth is you are statistically insignificant. And the deeper truth is that you're a couple sigma away from the mean. The fact that you're laughing tells me how far away from the average you are. No normal human understands that sentence. So, and here's the killer, right? So are all your friends. So you have to actually get out of your security bubble and go talk to people who are not like you, who are more representative of that population. And that's actually just getting those people to participate in your studies is hard. So we work pretty hard, and I'm going to tell you about what we do a little bit, but let me give you a couple examples of what I mean by this lack of intuition. So if we do a search for the query beer, and this is just total query volume, LA metro area only in 2007. That's kind of what you might expect, right? And so that's July 4th, that big spike there and so on. You might expect other adult beverages to have similar profiles, right? Well, this is wine. Okay. Holiday parties, right? Here's champagne, New Year's. Here's sparkling wine, which is the technical name for that, same sort of thing. And so what you end up seeing is that with our trends tools, you can actually start to dig into the data this way. So here's that same chart here for beer, And you can actually see it broken out by region and by cities and so on, and Florida does not show up. Sorry. You're not spending enough to show up on this, or not searching enough. Perhaps you just already know it. That could be the other explanation. But it's fascinating sort of ancillary correlated data here. Languages, this is worldwide. So we're getting lots of queries for beer in English, but then we're getting lots of queries for beer in Dutch. Beer is not spelled that way in Dutch, right? So it's a fascinating observation. What's going on there? Or Portuguese. Why are there so many Portuguese queries? Anyway, I leave those as exercise for the reader. You can also see that you get these sort of density searches by location. So Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, you understand. The rest of the U.S. doesn't matter, basically. But what's so fascinating to me about this is that our intuitions fail us in an interesting way. Our intuitions are personal. They're based on our experience. They feel right. And so a big part of what statistics classes in universities do is to teach you, don't believe it. Don't believe your intuitions, right? So I know Malcolm Gladwell got famous for writing Blink, but there's so many issues that come up with our development of intuition. For example, confirmation bias, sampling bias, natural statistics errors, and so on. There's a lot of causes for this. So you have to consciously work to get out of your intuition bubble. So this is what I call the invisibility of aggregated end user behaviors. When you have people coming to the library and looking here, and they're physically present, you can start to get a sense for that, because you have a sample. When people are coming in over the net to my information resource, you do not see them. Mostly you don't see their other behaviors as well. So I can't tell that that's a guy that doesn't own shoes, right, who's looking at very high-end expensive watches, which I've seen in the field. Fascinating thing. So one of the key things here is we do analysis to understand what searcher behavior is, because there's all kinds of trials and tribulations that these folks go through. I have literally sat in people's houses watching them search and had them scream at me. Right? That's a metaphoric image, but it's real. I've seen this happen. So we have to try to understand what these basic behaviors are, what these basic understandings are, what the basic misintuitions, misunderstandings are. And the way we do this at Google is take a kind of tripart view of data about our searchers, about what they're doing. So the first level is sort of at the micro level, from millisecond to millisecond, what are people doing? We also then work at the meso level, trying to understand what they're doing sort of minute by minute, hour by hour. And then we look at the macro level, looking at millions of people simultaneously. So each of these looks roughly like this. The millisecond to millisecond level is people coming into my lab with the eye tracker, and I can see what they're looking at on the page. So I can see, for example, that certain things attract their attention or do not. The negative information is equally important. When we do field studies, I go to your house, I visit you, I watch you work, I shadow you for a day, that kind of thing. And in sessions analysis, we're looking at millions of people. So let's look at the first one, millisecond by millisecond. We do typically 10 to 20 of these a week in the lab in Mountain View. We bring in 3 or 4 people, we bring in some observers. If you're the product manager for this service, you come and watch, and most of you then pull your hair out as you watch people doing this. I ran a usability lab at Apple, and my primary job was to prevent the software engineers from banging on the glass, shouting at the testers, "No, dummy, click in the upper right. Don't hit the glass." And so this is a typical lab. So we've got we have a video projection of what they're seeing over there, and we can actually look through the window, so on. And I want to show you a little video here, see if this will work. Yeah. This is a video of somebody using a new UI. I'll just let it run here. So let me pause it for a second. The setup here is we have a new UI element that we're testing here, okay? And what we're doing with this test is to watch how her eye moves around on the screen to see whether or not she notices the new UI element. So the new UI element, just so you'll know, are these triangles here. Yeah, oh, right, that's exactly right. So the thing about this video is she never looks at the triangle. Never. So this was one of our tests. I'll just let you watch it for a little bit. You don't really have to listen to what she says. It's easier to read. It's like it's perverse. So she's confabulating, right? That's the fancy word for making stuff up, okay? So she's making stuff up because we put it into this experimental condition, and she thinks there should be something different, and she doesn't see what it is. So she just said, oh, it's a different font, it's clearer, you change the spacing, you change it. No, we didn't do anything other than add those triangles, okay? So it's an interesting perceptual problem. This is what I mean by the millisecond by millisecond thing. When you do stuff like change the color of the blue link font, even tiny amount, it changes the click-through probability. Yeah, floored me too. But that's true, and your intuition about that really sucks. Because I've literally seen shades of blue links that look to me like they're identical, but this one gets 5% more click-through than that one. So my intuition was 0 on that, and totally incorrect. So let's talk about doing field studies, because I will often go visit somebody, and I'll ask them questions like, so how does a search engine work? And I stopped asking that question after a while, because mostly people go, there are pigeons somewhere. So a typical field interview would be, I'll ask a set of questions, and something like, which actor won the most Oscars? And then in this interview, I'll show you a clip of the video. I'll show you the transcript here on the right. And we go back and forth, and she's talking here, describing how she would look for this particular thing. Which actor or actress won the most Oscars in the history of the Academy Awards? And she's talking through the Talk Aloud protocol. Listen to what she says. That's the query she's typing. This is your kitchen table. She's really stuck. So this is a kind of behavior called stuck in a mode. So she's up the very top, it says, blah, 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 reading at 19 seconds in, news results for actors most Oscars. She read it aloud but did not process it. So she's in news and trying to find this thing about the actor most Oscars, right? And it's not going to work. She doesn't, so visually we have failed her. We did not signify that you're in a different book. In fact, you're in a different section altogether. It's not visually different enough. Nobody ever gets confused when they're searching Google Images, right? You never get confused. But when you're searching patents or news or regular web results or different kinds of resources, they're not visually different enough. So since this time, we've started to make that different. And it happens less often, but it still happens. So that's the kind of stuff we discover in field studies. Now when we look at the aggregate behavior of millions and millions of people searching every day, basically it's a logs analysis problem. So we have billions of log records coming in every day, and what we do is we look at them trying to extract out behavior patterns that we can then build on. Because remember, my job is to make the experience better, to make the quality better. So what, if I look at all these logs, can I figure out? So you saw some examples earlier, but here's a nice example. This is a query volume from 4 different countries. Green is Germany. This is a regular Sunday, hour by hour. This is during the Football World Cup. So this is, you can sort of see it broken down minute by minute here. This is when the World Cup begins. They stop doing queries. Halftime. And then it starts to go up because they start losing. And so people start turning and saying, who's that stupid referee? Or, you know, it's fascinating to look at this kind of stuff, because this is data from my online class. This is for the past year. Okay, so what you're seeing here, this regular pattern here, boom, boom, 7 days. Saturday and Sunday, people don't come to my class. No surprise, but I still have, you know, a few hundred in there every Saturday and Sunday. Okay? This big jump here, this is Monday, week 1, Monday, week 2, so this 2-week segment. Marketing! Yay! So that's exactly one marketing campaign. And then the marketing campaign persists over some time, and slowly we start to get more and more people by word of mouth. But this is basically right here, July. Yeah, that's when we launched the new version of the course. We did a campaign push here. But here we're still running, you know, a few thousand every day. But you see, when you look at this, hour by hour student behavior. I can see when India comes online, because I start to see the student spikes. I can see when India goes away. I can see individual classes. I can see Mrs. Smith's class in New Jersey come online, because all of a sudden, wham, 50 students come on at 9:05 a.m., right? So you can start to see this, and I showed you this example before of the terrible UIs in the maps thing, discovered because we looked at how often these buttons were being clicked. Answer, never. That log, you don't have to think about it too hard before you figure out that this is totally failing. So when we're working in the UI, when we're designing search, we live with this kind of lack of knowledge, because I can't watch a million people simultaneously. So what we try to do is to figure out how we can instrument the data, how we can do analytics to start to understand that. And basically at bottom, it means we run lots of experiments. So what we do in these experiments is we post something, we usually split it out into A, B, C, different arms. So you get A, you get B, you get C, and so on, right? And we have 1 million of you and 1 million of you, and so on, right? We can start to compare it. But some of the metrics will go up, and some will go down, and some won't change. And so it's not as easy as just saying everybody went up on A and everybody went down on B. Sometimes it is, but mostly it's more complex. It's not a closed science. It still requires a lot of interpretation. So for example, cookie churn alone is a huge hassle. The half-life of a cookie is really, really small. What that means is that I can't necessarily track by cookie what an individual is doing. So I have to do these mass aggregates thing, grouping by, say, major IP areas and so on. What's worse is the same cookie can represent multiple people. So for example, there's an iPad at my home, which gets used by everybody and his brother. And so the query set on that iPad, which is one cookie, represents everything from basketball scores, through cooking tips, through ways to do soldering, right? That's not one person. That's the aggregate of everybody who walks through my house, basically. And that's true for a lot of different kinds. You'll see these really disparate kinds of things. In particular, there will be family accounts or school accounts where you'll see all these queries, and there's no way that's one person. So it's interesting to be a scientist in this world, because everything changes, right? The stream of data is never the same twice. Your foot is not the same twice. When you step in that water, it's always different, right? We often can't even rerun experiments because so much has changed. Not only does the stream of data change, but the query behavior changes because we don't have the same people, but the underlying data set changes as well. The web itself changes. So it's really hard to get controls. So for example, an experiment that was run a year ago, I literally cannot rerun it now in many cases. So our science is really different. Tell you a story. Anybody use advanced search? Recognize this? Okay, a few of you, okay? This is the Google advanced search page. Several years ago, I was given the task of making it better. Russell, make it better. All right. So what I did is I did a logs analysis, and I saw that lots of people were bouncing out of it. They would come to this page, and less than 5 seconds later, they'd hit back. 80%. Really? 80% of people never actually used it. They visited it and left. I thought, what's going on? So what I did is I did a bunch of field studies. And this is where the first person who ever yelled at me. I was in her house in a very hot August day, and she came to this page, and she yelled at it and hit back. And I thought, ooh, that's one. I wrote down. And she said, I hate this. I hate this. Really? say more, right? And I'm taking notes. And then she started walking me through different parts of it, like this. And this is where the intuition part really gets you, because this looks intuitively obvious to me. But she said, look, bonehead, find all, do I have to fill out all 4 of those slots? They're all in the same color bar. I guess I have to fill them all out, right? But if you read them, you say with all the words, with the exact phrases, with at least one of the words, and without the words. No, right? But I know too much search logic. She doesn't, right? She doesn't know those are different conditions. Okay, what about this one down here? Usage rights. Return results that are not filtered by a license. You mean, I'm not kidding, she said this, you mean I have to get a license to see these results? I hadn't thought about that interpretation. She didn't know what copyright restrictions were. She'd never heard of Creative Commons, none of that stuff. Forget about it. So that's scary. That's literally the word she used. It's scary. I think I have to get a license for this. I said, no, don't worry. But I hate this. Numeric rate, no, this one's a subtle one, actually. She read this as numeric range occurrences. But there are 2 spots over here, right? How do I interpret that? Is it the topography is terrible, right? Okay, I'm getting the hint here. And so when she says, this scares me, I listen. I really take it to heart. So like I said, we had an 80% bounce rate. 85% of all page visits were under 5 seconds, so we were not doing very well. We did a very simple UI change. That's it, that's the new UI. We reduced it by half, hid the scary stuff underneath, fixed up the fonts, fixed up the typography, made things more legible, and all of a sudden, we changed the behavior. It went down to 43% bounce rate. Factor of 2 improvement with a simple HTML change, right? We wrote no code for this. It's pure typography, pure layout. So the successful queries went up by a factor of 10. It's a very simple thing. But you gotta look at it. Your intuition will not tell you that. So if you think about testing different kinds of variations, so for example, you've got a website, you're a small company, you're XYZ Corp, or your library site, or your university site, or whatever. You advertise, you do various things like putting up statements, like usually, click here to sign up for, right, or whatever. So we do a lot of tests like this. So here are 5 different ways to say the same thing. Which label, which text label do you put onto a button? Advertise your business, get new customers, connect with new customers, and so on. So here are 5 different ways. Which of these do you predict would be the best in terms of click-through? I didn't get it. So this was the original, so that was our control. This one drove our click-through rate down. This one drove it up. This one drove it. This one wins, right? Now, it's nothing obvious, like this is probably the longest statement here, and yet it got the most click-through rates. 0.75% increase is pretty good. So we kept experimenting with versions like this, right? So here's 100,000 trials over a 1-week period. Again, a small variation, extending the same experiment. Now look at the results. 24% improvement. Really? That's worth real money. And what's fascinating to me about this is it's very, very subtle. And you cannot deduce it from first principles. You have to test it. Another example. This is from Brian Eisenberg. He had 2 versions of the same UI. Which one performed better? A or B? Answer, B is worse. Okay? It actually is worse, partly because there's more junk on the page. Okay? In particular, there's this really interesting one that says here, enter coupon code. Sounds like a great idea, right? You're going to give your users a coupon. They can save money. What happens is the user gets to this page and says, I can find a coupon, and they leave. You never want them to leave. Okay? So stop that, right? Don't tell them about it. If they don't know about it already, if you remove that one thing, you get 6.5% back. Okay? So things that seem obvious are in fact sometimes detrimental. Very simple improvement. So what matters, right? From my perspective as a person who's trying to improve overall search quality, trying to make everything, the whole experience better, The answer is everything. Everything matters. The color matters, the visual complexity matters, the text choice, the font choice, the vertical position, the horizontal position, everything, right? Like I said, you change the color of that blue and we change the click-through rate. You change the interline letting, you change the click-through rate. Everything matters. So the biggest counterintuitive surprise to me is that these small changes can make a big difference. Up to, we've seen changes of 100% based on small changes. Even something as little as a half-second delay in getting results back to you can make a profound difference in the kind of clicks and kind of behavior you get. That blew my mind when we found that. 20% difference by adding half a second. What we did, if you ever look at the top of the search results page, it says 2 million results brought to you in 0.5 seconds, right? Or whatever, 0.3 seconds, 0.2 seconds. Why do we do that? Because if we make it 1 second, we lose a fifth of view. Half a second makes a difference. So if your site has say a large graphic that takes 4 or 5 seconds to load, stop it. You're losing a big chunk of your traffic. You may not know it because you may not have it instrumented. But we know from little examples like this, which is based on millions of users, that even something as subtle as half a second can make a big difference. Or something as dumb as a one-word change in your ad copy can change your click-through rate by a factor of 3. Okay? If you're actually trying to make money in a business, that could be the difference between profitability and failure. So these things really do matter. Location on the page matters. Where your result appears on the search results page matters. Where you place your button on the page matters. If you move it on the left versus right. So we had, for example, one page where you would fill out the entire form, blah, 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 blah. You scroll up, fill the form, fine. And submit was up here. You had to scroll backwards to hit submit. Don't do that. That's dumb 101, right? So you want to be careful about these things because something like, even something as simple as pre-attentive recognition, for example, the presence of a logo on the page. If it's a logo that people recognize, it will boost credibility, it will boost speed of access, it will boost click-through rate. If it's an unfamiliar logo, all those things go down. Now, the SEO people know this really well, and so they will borrow logos, shall we say, from well-known companies and put them on their page, even though they haven't paid for rights to do that, because they know that increases click-through rate, it increases credibility. It may have nothing whatsoever to do with the product, but it increases recognizability. Okay? So they know this stuff. They know this cognitive psychology as well as we do. So when we think about these things, what's the role of design? Because you could say to me, Dan, you're such a wonk. All you want to do is measure stuff. Well, let me tell you, design is just as important, maybe more important than ever, because there are too many variables here. You just can't control it. So the role of design and designers is kind of what it's always been historically, which is to guide the search for the good experience, right? A great book designer, a great typographer moves stuff around, sometimes very subtle increments, in order to find that great experience, that thing that resonates, that font that says, this is a 19th century classic. So there are too many things to change. We can't test them all. We still need to make choices. So the skill of the designer is to make those choices. It is to choose the right font, to choose the right colors, because the space is too big. It's n-dimensional where n is large, like 200 or 300 different variables. So we have to choose rational points within that space. And then we test. And then we test. So what this means, I think, is the role of analytics is complementary to that of design. Designers create this stuff, and then we do analysis. We do these experiments to try to test this stuff, so we can then guide the design. This isn't the right ballpark, but we need to shift it this way. We know from these other results that it's too low on the page, bring it up. All of those things. So we need to discover the counterintuitive. Find the stuff that doesn't work for the population you care about. And ultimately, I want us to have this sort of new emergent science of design/analytics, where we design intelligently to understand what people are searching for and why they're doing it and what they're doing with that. Because once we understand that, then we can start to design even better. So I think for us, is that there's this kind of coevolution between the users, the readers, the patrons, and the search engines and web providers, information providers. Interestingly, the search engines will continue to change, right? We now, for example, have had for a couple of years search by image. If you don't, how many people use search by image? Raise your hand. The rest of you, search for it right now. Google Earth, number 1, search by image, number 2. It will change the way you think about image search. For example, as a writer, I will write something and I'll just put in an image, knowing that my readers can search for that image and figure out the provenance of that image. Or do I assume that they can't? Right? It's always, when you write, you're having this constant tension between, should I use that low frequency, cool word? Can I use a word like peruse and believe that everybody knows what peruse means? Quick test. Peruse means to skim rapidly. Raise your hand. Peruse means to read deeply. Raise your hand. Okay, 90% of you not voting, right? What it means is to read deeply. It does not mean to skim, right? So when you say, hey, peruse this document in the next 30 seconds, you're actually violating the language, all right? But more to the point, what do you assume your readers and your users know? Okay, so this is why we're constantly evolving. We're looking for new ways to provide this. But we also need to match our expectations in the things we do with our users, right? We need to know, for example, that something like 75% of all queries in India are made in English. And you would think, well, what about Hindi? Answer, they want their answers in Hindi. But typing in Hindi is such a pain that they'd much rather ask in English and get the answers back in Hindi, right? So we have to understand these kind of subtle things, because for search engines, we have a responsibility, right? We need to create these inferential engines that can help, right? Or as my buddy Jeff Nunberg says, right, from Google's view, the web is more, not so much a piazza as a souk. It's all these little tiny places where you can find stuff, right? And so what we're doing is trying to figure out how we can provide this information to you. But you, the user, you got to step up, right? Because we're going to give you vast amounts. Look, the internet is a giant place. Giant. Bigger than you can imagine. And we're going to try to find you the one thing that you're looking for out of that trillions of objects. So I think what we need to do as a culture is to learn how to search, right? We think we know how to search, but you know, we all live in Lake Wobegon too. You're better than average. Truth is, I can help you become a better searcher. And I can take in some cases I found I can get 25, 50% improvement in search times. Pay attention to the user interfaces. You have to learn to read the user interface in the same way that you've learned to read books or magazines. You know the design rhetoric of a journal like Cosmopolitan, right? 5 new recipes that involve cream cheese, 10 new ways to lose diet and lose that fat you just put on, right? There's a particular rhetoric there. There's a rhetoric of user interface design as well. We should be learning that as well, because I will argue in the long run it's going to count more to you than Cosmo. For example, taking the time to investigate the new options. How many of you get a new app and never click on all of the menu items at the top? That's like getting a book and never looking at the table of contents. That's kind of crazy. Cultivating a curious mind, because there's almost always more to the story than the first answer will tell you. And making learning about this part of your personal learning agenda, right? You know what kind of era we live in. It's constantly changing. There's more scientific information being published now than ever. In the time we've been here, roughly 10 days of YouTube content has been uploaded to YouTube while we've been talking. 10 days. Okay, now let's say 9 days of that is funny cat videos. Okay, that leaves 1 day of interesting content. Let's say that your domain is 1/10 of that. So you've got 2.4 hours of stuff in your content area, your domain, your discipline, that's been uploaded to YouTube. And you've just wasted an hour listening to me. You're already behind. You can't keep up. So now we live in an age of information triage, very seriously, and that was just YouTube. not to mention the journals and the books and so on, right? So this is one of these things that we have to take on as a personal agenda. And so let me leave you with my last story. Like I said, I teach a lot, and part of what I do is when I go to these schools, I'll go to universities and I'll teach teachers at teacher colleges, or I'll go to K-12 classes. And I taught in Foster City, which is a suburb of San Francisco. It's near Mountain View. And it's a super diverse group of students. I was in Miss Wong's 4th grade class, right? 30 kids, 30 languages. There are 2 kids who speak Chinese, 2 kids who speak Hebrew, a kid who speaks Spanish, a kid who speaks German, and so on, right? Really super diverse. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll teach them how to use Google Translate, right? What a good idea. So being 4th graders, 2 weeks later, I get this big package of thank you letters in the mail. It was really sweet, right? And so one of them struck me, though. It was from a little boy named Armando. And Armando said, thank you, Dr. Russell, for showing us how to use Google Translate. See, Armando's grandparents live in Honduras, and he wants to write to them, wants to write to Grandma and Grandpa. But his parents don't want him to speak Spanish, so they're not letting him learn Spanish, because it's downwardly mobile, right? So they don't want him to learn Spanish. But he wants to write to abuelito and abuelita. And so he wants to write to them. So he said, thank you for teaching me how to do this, because I've always wanted to write to my grandma, and now I can. So I think it's a great story. I don't know that he's, going to be the best searcher in the universe, but he now can write to his grandmother in Honduras. That made it for me. So like we said, I do teach the world how to search. I have a website called thegoogleaday.com, which is basically little test trivia questions. I recommend it to you if you don't have anything to do on a Saturday night. And I also have, as you see here, the Power of Searching with Google.com. We're starting a new class on Monday. It's a 2-week class. As of right now, I had to update my data since the introduction. I've had 2.8 million students go through the class. My job is to teach the world how to search. I only have a few billion left to go. Thank you very much.